I'm Vincent. Let me start by asking who knows me? Who knows who I am? Some of you, about half of you. I'm flattered, thank you. Thank you very much. And my second question is, who is designing a role-playing game? Tabletop, face-to-face role-playing game. Fewer than half of you. What's that about? So like, why aren't you all, who likes tabletop role-playing? Okay, so here's the answer to why the rest of you aren't designing games. It's right there. Does the text say crash course? Did I write a crash course in tabletop role-playing game design? I did. Okay, so I'm going to not try to convince you of anything. If you disagree with me, you are well within your rights to disagree with me. We can still be friends. You don't have to agree with me. If you corner me sometime, I'll be happy to argue with you about it. But for this presentation, I'm not going to try to talk you into my point of view. I'm going to tell you what my point of view is, and then trust you all to disregard it or take what's useful from it to you for your own purposes on your own. And I'm very reachable online. You can approach me in person. I'm happy to talk to you. But for this presentation, I'm not going to try to talk you into anything. So let me start there. Who here of the people who know me now knows what the Forge was? A few people. Okay. The Forge was a discussion forum online where from 2002, let's say, to 2010 or 9 or something like that, we talked a lot about role-playing theory. So if I say, back on the Forge, that's what I'm talking about. And please, so that word should not be alien to you, is what I'm saying. When I say the Forge, I just mean an online discussion forum. It doesn't mean anything. And I think I should start, yeah? Yeah, okay. I'm going to doodle on this while I'm talking. Don't expect it to mean anything. That's just more comfortable for me. I may write words on there that you can't read. That's fine. Just like, I don't know what. I prefer to draw. Part of the problem with talking about role-playing games, talking about role-playing game design, and I'm going to make a distinction in just a minute that's very important. But part of the problem about talking about role-playing game design is that the way I communicate about role-playing game design is by designing games. This is what I think about role-playing games. This is what I think about role-playing game design. And telling you what I think about role-playing game design instead of just going, is much harder. And it's much, I am not as solid in my discussion as I am in my designs. My ideas are not as articulate in discussion as they are here. And this may be inarticulate, but this is the best way I could come up with to express these ideas. So I'll do my best. I beg your indulgence, and I'll break periodically for questions. And if I really lose you, start flailing your arms, and I'll stop there. And that's my fault, and I apologize in advance for the stupid things I'm about to say. Let me start by drawing this crucial distinction, and this is what excites me. This distinction is what excites me about role-playing game design, which is that there are two arts. And I should ask, who was here yesterday when I spoke? Wow, okay. So less than a third of you, maybe a quarter of you. I'll cover some of the same ground, but I'm going to try to talk about game design here. So the thing that excites me about role-playing game design is that there are these two interacting arts. And my art, or craft, I don't care about that distinction, but don't let my use of the word art throw you. I just mean a thing people do, a thing people practice and get good at. My art is role-playing game design, and my audience is a whole second body of artists who are role-playing game players who create these experiences in play, in action. And like I said this yesterday, it's unique off the top of my head. Like if I were making paintbrushes, it's like I'm trying to make a provocative paintbrush, right? It's trying to make I'm trying to make a paintbrush that inspires and provokes and interrogates the painter. Even making video games, there the art is much more one-sided. My audience, if I were making video games, the players would not be creating the way they are in a role-playing game. So that distinction, I'm going to talk about role-playing game design. I'm going to talk about that art. I'm not going to talk much about the art of playing, the art of GMing, the art of creating, using the rules and the game design as a tool, as a constraint, as a medium, or as the definition of the medium. The medium is play itself. But so that's the important distinction I want to draw first, is that I'm going to talk about design and I'm going to talk about what we do as game designers, not about what players do, except as they reflect on each other, which they do quite a bit. Anyway, the next thing I want to say is maybe the hardest thing. A good friend of mine, Joshua Newman. Does anybody know Joshua A.C. Newman? He wrote Shock, which is a science fiction role-playing game. He's a fellow game designer. He's been teaching game design courses at a college in Western Mass. And he says the same thing. Role players are very, I was going to say very bad, but it's not a judgment. They're not practiced at thinking of what they do as a game. Role-playing game designers do not think of role-playing games the way that board game designers think of board games, the way that video game designers think of video games, even though fundamentally we're all game designers. And those arts, the role-playing game design art and the board game design art, those are very closely related, the video game design art, and so on. Game design is game design is game design. So the first thing I'm going to say is a very difficult thing, which is very difficult. I can't even bring myself to write it. It's so difficult. RPGs have goals. Chess has a goal. When I play chess, my goal is to checkmate your king. Poker has a goal. When I play poker, my goal is to take your money. Civilization has a goal. Whatever civilization's goal is, suck my life away. Thank you. You too. But role-playing game designers have trouble thinking about the goals of their games. And so I'm just going to write this here in red, and I'm going to say role-playing games have goals. And it's not crucial that you be able to articulate the goal of your game, although it's valuable to be able to. Because when you design a game, you're really going, But if you can articulate the goal of your role-playing game, then you can communicate it more effectively to the players. And this is the fundamental, if you ask me, the fundamental skill that you can practice and learn and develop as a designer that will help you design games that hit those goals. Learning to identify and understand and articulate the goal of your game. Okay, this is my game Murderous Ghosts, and I'm going to talk a little bit about my game Murderous Ghosts. I am going to run this tomorrow, probably in this space. I'm not positive, right here. I designed this game as a 2-player game, and it turns out that it works beautifully in front of an audience, with an audience's participation. In this game, you hold that book, and I hold this book. I am a brave young person who is exploring the basement of an abandoned factory, and you are the ghosts who are haunting that basement, who are going to murder me, who are going to try to murder me. If I escape the basement of the abandoned factory, I win. And if you murder me, I lose. We play book to book, back and forth like this. Can I indulge you? Will you indulge me rather for a moment, and we'll do a quick example here. So I've come into a space. There's a ghost here, a murderous ghost that has not become aware of me. It is doing whatever this ghost does. Would you rather I pick on someone else, or are you okay?
Okay.
I chose you. You look brave. So this ghost hasn't become aware of me. This ghost lives in a ghostly nightmare of violence and sorrow, right? And it hasn't become aware of me. So tell me what this ghost looks like, and tell me what this ghost is doing. It's a microphone.
Yeah, that's a weird mic. I'm unimaginative, and it's a little Japanese dead girl with face covered in black hair.
Yes. And what's it doing? So I'm in this dark room. I have a little headlight.
Standing there and staring at all of the audience.
Okay. So I turn to page 4 in my book. You tell me to turn to page 4. And in page 4 it says, what do I most hope that ghost doesn't do? Do I most hope it doesn't look at me? Do I most hope it doesn't reach out to me? Do I most hope it doesn't speak? And I choose one, and I say, I really hope it doesn't reach out to me. I really, honestly hope. And then we draw cards and we find out. And I tell you, it doesn't reach out to me, but it does speak, and you tell me what it says, and so on. And while we play this, your goal is to murder me, and my goal is to escape. So when I say that being able to articulate your game's goal, that I know what my goal is and that you know what your goal is, allows me to play without worrying whether I am contributing correctly, without worrying whether I am giving you what you need. I know what you need. You need to tell me about this ghost that's going to murder me. I know what I need. And this allows the players then to give themselves more confident, more bold, more full expression in that second art, which is the art of creating using a role-playing game as a medium. So that's all I'm going to say. In defensive role-playing games have goals. I'll refer back to this, but I think this is a crucial piece, a crucial practice for a role-playing game designer to undertake, to identify the goals of your game and to then be able to judge whether your game is hitting those goals or not hitting those goals. And that's what I'm going to say about that. And then I think I will talk about some details. Okay.
Sorry.
Yes, please.
Would you say this mostly applies to games more focused on storytelling, or also the so-called old school dungeon bashing games?
Oh, if anything, I think it applies equally to both. Old school Dungeons and Dragons. I first played, some of you heard this, I first played Dungeons and Dragons as an adult. 2008, I think, was the first time I really played Dungeons and Dragons the way it was written. And this is basic D&D, Moldve, 1980. Red box, blue box, blue box. I don't remember. And those games, that game was much more explicit about its goals than Vampire the Masquerade, than Ars Magica, than Shadowrun. These are the games I played later, or that I played earlier, that had been designed later. Dungeons and Dragons was relatively very explicit about its goals. You know, my goal as a Dungeons and Dragons character, you know, my goal as a player is to see that character succeed, and to have that character confront the challenges that come to him and to triumph over them, you know, very straightforwardly. As straightforwardly as it's my goal to escape the factory instead of being murdered by ghosts. It's my goal to get the treasure and get out. Dungeons and Dragons, in particular, early Dungeons and Dragons, wow, that's a long tangent, where you get experience points for the treasure, not for beating up the monsters. Like, that is a different, that tells me what my goal is, which is to get the treasure and to avoid getting killed, rather than to be, anyway. So I think that it applies equally to both, and I think that in many ways those earlier games, because they were games, the designers understood them as games, were more explicit about what their goals were. Does that answer your question? Okay, good. So let me leave this here. And let me look at my notes, which I had here a second ago. Oh, they're on the thing. Let me talk about role-playing. So what I like to say about role-playing as a form. Oh, there's so much to cover, so much to cover. So here is us, right? Tell me your name. Miko. Here's Miko and I. Here am I, yes. And here are these little booklets that we're holding in front of us. These are real things. And in the case of Murderous Ghosts, it also calls for a deck of cards. So here's the deck of cards. And here in our conversation, oh, right. I used to always draw this as a thought bubble, but I need to stop doing that. Here in our conversation is this ghost, and is the dark room that I'm in, and the fact that I'm an urban spelunker who's exploring a factory late at night. These are all fictional things that are in the matter of our conversation. These are all real things that cue our conversation. When I look at this real thing, it tells me to say something. My character, I hope that this ghost doesn't reach out to me. So a role-playing game design, a board game looks like this. Oh, so we interact. And we interact with these real objects, and this is the fictional stuff that we interact about. A board game, chess, or a computer game, Civilization, it has none of this. There are pixels on a screen, there are pawns on a board. You don't care what my bishop feels. You know, I may imagine things, but they aren't part of our communication about our game. So these are the three pieces of a role-playing game. There are the real-world cues, there's the fictional stuff that's the matter of our conversation, and there is us having our real interactions referring to these things. So role-playing game design means structuring our interactions, usually using cues, about these fictional things, and having cues that refer to fictional things and fictional things that refer to cues. Am I way out? Have I... Who's cool with this? Okay. Oh, good, good. So these interactions that I have designed, where I'm flipping with a book, flipping through a book, you're flipping through a book, we're having this conversation that is structured in a particular way. These interactions supplant our natural interactions, the same way that the goal of the game supplants our natural best interests. Is everybody with me on that? A couple of people. Okay, let me try to say that more. So this is true of any game. This is true of chess. Okay, here's a good story. There's a game, I forget the name of it, Quattro maybe, in the US, and it's a game where there are cylinders that are hollow, and a larger cylinder can swallow a smaller cylinder. You play it on a board. And I'm playing this game with my then 10-year-old, my 10-year-old son. He's now 16, this is a bunch of years ago. And I'm playing with it, and he's winning. Like, he's kicking my ass at Quattro. And then I get some insight into how the game works, and I win, right? At the last minute, I pull it out, and I win. And I'm like, yes, yes, woo! And the people around me are like, congratulations, you just beat your 10-year-old son at a game. I'm like, no, he was winning. This is a legit win. He was going to beat me. In real life, I would never go, yes, yeah, in your face, Sebastian. At him suffering any setback. But the game supplants our natural interactions and our natural interests. Like in the real world, my son's best interests are very much at my heart, in my heart. But when we play a game, I set those real interests aside in the space of the game. And this is magic circle, is that a term that people use? I'm not actually educated, so I'm sorry for that. But in the same way, the goals of the game set aside our natural interests. The rules of the game set aside our natural interactions. I'm touching in the wrong places. Say that again? Yeah. Thank you for bringing that into the conversation. I appreciate that. No, thank you. So I think, so who's with me now? Yes, questions. Questions are great. I love a question. Right now, I love a question. Here you go.
GM's girlfriend.
What?
GM's girlfriend.
The first time I played Dungeons & Dragons, right? I'm playing at a convention. My friend Ben is running. His girlfriend Alexis is playing the elf. I'm playing, I don't remember. I died early. Was I a halfling? No, somebody else was halfling. They made an awesome joke. Anyway, the point is, the GM's girlfriend got away with the magic sword when the rest of us died. So that's the thing.
Yeah, but the thing is, the GM's girlfriend syndrome, so-called, that's the natural interests come into play and the social interactions supplanting the mechanical game thing in many times.
Sure.
Yeah.
Often I'd let my son win.
But in role-playing games, I think it's very usual that sort of romantic interest and also that sort of thing might come into play if the players aren't mature enough, or I don't know.
So let me go back to my original distinction. Say, yes, absolutely. That's not my job as a designer to take care of that. That's in the art of the players to take care of that. That means that they are not expressing themselves. They are not using the paintbrush, right? They're not playing the game. Okay, so when you design a game, you are designing a bell curve. Oh my God, okay. When you design a game, you're designing a bell curve. You've sent me on this wild, ridiculous tangent. I wasn't even gonna talk about this, but this is fun. And what you design, also I'm not a mathematician, I'm making this shit up, I'm sorry. What you design is play under a bell curve. And if people are letting their girlfriend win, like that's something I am aware of as a designer. But what I'm designing is this piece of the curve. A friend of mine wrote to me and said, "We played your game. It wasn't fun. Were we playing it wrong?" And I'm like, "No. There's gameplay that isn't fun under the curve I designed. Like, what do you want me to do about it? You played by the rules, right?" And we went through, and yes, he'd played by the rules. And I'm like, "So it wasn't fun." Like sometimes chess isn't fun too, right? I played Go for the first time a couple of years ago with a guy who was good at it, and it was the first time I ever played Go. And you game designers probably know this. You'll never play a game just for fun ever again, right? You say again? Unfortunately. Yeah. Yeah. You unfortunately, he said for the mic. You can't turn off. It's very rare for a game to turn off that analytical part of your brain, and that's my dad was an architect, and he never just looked at a building. It's just part of the price you pay. Have you seen the cartoon? If you hate your friend, teach him to recognize bad kerning. Because you'll never be happy again, right? So I was playing Go for the first time, and I was having these great insights into Go. He told me that Go is a game of injustice, that it's unjust, that he's defeating my little pawns over here, my stones, and that I want justice for them. And he told me that a good Go move, a good Go play, is beautiful. And if you can, instead of reading the board the way I was trying to, instead of trying to understand what would happen in the future, he said, no, make a beautiful move. And that's great. Like, I love that. And I watched how he played, and I noticed he was not playing on the square or on the diagonal, but on the knight's move, one off the diagonal. And he said, yes, that's true. That's what I'm doing. And that's really great. And so I'm really engaged in this game. And then he says, okay, Vincent, sometimes when you're playing Go, you'll find yourself 30, 50, 70 points ahead, and then it's your opponent's job to make that up, right? Then you can stop playing aggressively, play very conservatively, and your opponent must, in order to win, play much more aggressively, win back that lost ground. So that's what I'm going to do. And I'm like, 50 to 70, I thought I was doing good. It was terrible. I hated it. It was a humiliating, awful experience. But it definitely fell under that bell curve of Go's game design. And so letting your girlfriend win falls under the bell curve of the game design. There's not much as a designer. You accept that there is a diversity of play and a diversity of play experiences that you have designed a game to create. Again, if you know what the goal of your game is, you can then judge this bell curve you've designed. And I can say of Murderous Ghosts that this is what I wanted from Murderous Ghosts. The best piece of playtest feedback I got for this game. Somebody played it, and he came back to me and said, Vincent, I hated this game. This game was completely unsatisfying. I thought I would be the protagonist of a horror story, and instead I was like that guy in the first 20 minutes who gets murdered by the ghosts. I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what you were. That's what I'm designing right here. Right? This is where you're the protagonist of the story. So knowing the goal of your game means that you can judge whether your game works. Whether your game is hitting the points that you want it to hit. Okay, what should I say next? Role-playing games. It's very, very easy, and many of the examples I'm going back to, the goal is to win. However winning is defined, checkmating your king, getting to the end of the Super Mario Brothers level so the little flag goes down and you go doodly doodly doo. like those are very easy goals, right? Having the most points, getting your friends money if you're playing poker. Those are very easy goals to identify. For role-playing games, for the majority of role-playing games, post Dungeons and Dragons, like I said, for the majority of sort of conventional role-playing games, the goals are much harder to identify, even when they're very present. And I don't want to talk too much about. I played a ton of Ars Magica. I played Ars Magica for 20 years or something, ridiculous amount of Ars Magica. And that game is not well designed. And that makes its goals very difficult to identify because the game design is, I'm gonna say the word incoherent. The game design is incoherent. And what that means is that one subsystem interferes with the workings of another subsystem. The way that in Ars Magica, the way that the damage you take from being hit with a sword, the way that that mechanic works interferes with the way that studying magical arts works, let's say. I don't remember the precise matters of incoherence. But what that does is it disrupts. Well, anyway, I don't want to use this metaphor too much. Is that it makes it very difficult to identify the goals because the goal of the combat subsystem is different from the goal of the studying magic in your laboratory season after season subsystem. So for many sort of conventional role-playing games, it's very difficult to talk about their goals. And I think that that's one of the reasons why role players have such a hard time talking about the role-playing game designers, rather, have such a hard time talking about the goals of their designs, is that we've learned our craft from these texts that are really quite opaque. But we can talk about the goals that are not winning and losing of some games. I'm prepared to talk about some games. A few of you know Shock, my friend Joshua's game. In that game, the goal is to create, I'm gonna have to say the word story. I hate saying that word. The goal, I take it back. I'm not going to say the word story. The goal of Shock is to at the beginning of character creation, you write down a question for your character. We played a game where we were harvesting body parts from clones to keep ourselves from dying, something like that. And I was a physician, a surgeon. And the question I wrote down was, will I recognize clone rights? Will I recognize the human rights of clones? And so the object of the game is for me to answer that question. The goal of the game is for me to answer that question. And that is a very different thing than the goal is for me to escape from the ghosts. If I escape from the ghosts, I've won. And if I don't escape from the ghosts, if they murder me, I've lost. If I answer that question, however I answer it, whatever the answer is, whatever process gets me to that answer, I have successfully played Shock. And if I don't answer that question, only then have I unsuccessfully played Shock. So in my point here talking about Shock is that in a role-playing game, very often the goal is not to win, but the goal is to, let's say, answer a question about your character. Is my character worthy to be king? Like, that's a really interesting question. And if my goal is to answer that question, no matter what the answer is, just to find out what the answer to that question is, that can create long-term gripping role-playing. Who's with me on that? Awesome. Yeah, let me toss you the cube. Where?
Yep.
Yes.
So I'd just like to ask a small clarification. When you're talking about the goal of the game, are you talking like more about the goals that the game sets for the players, or the goal that the game designer has for the game. I ask this because in the Ars Magica example, it occurred to me that the goal of the game could conceivably have been to sort of just realistically simulate the lives of sorcerers in the Middle Ages, in which case one subsystem interfering with another in the sense of making the player's goals incoherent might not be an actual problem if the game designers thought that a realistic simulation of the world would have the consequence of making it problematic to sort of for the players to clearly pursue their goals.
Well, if that is what you want to do as a game designer, that's between you and your craft. I'm not going to tell you that's not a legitimate goal for a role-playing game. We could interrogate Ars Magica's text. We could read what Ars Magica says its goal is, and we would have to tease it out. It would be hard work, and there would be different legitimate differences of opinions between us. But sure, like if that's the game you want to design, that's the game you should design, and you should know what your goal is. And but no, I'm talking about the goal that as a designer you are setting for the players, or the goal that as a designer, the range of goals that you are allowing the players to. Let me back up. That is an excellent question, and let me give it a second. Because I said out loud the goal that you are setting for the players, like to checkmate your opponent's king, or to get your friend's money. And I may want to stand on that. I may want to say that no, I'm talking about the goal that you're setting for the players. And I may want to say that to design a role-playing game that doesn't suck, you need to know what goal you're setting for your players. You need to do the design work to set that goal for your players. I may want to say that. That may be what I think. Would you pass the cube back to, right behind you.
I just wanted to clarify, when you say goals for player, do you mean player or player character?
I mean the player.
Okay. And follow up on that, on the Ars Magica point, it's a slightly unfair comparison because Ars Magica is, in some respects, a sandbox. It wrongly thinks it's a storyteller game, really it's a sandbox game. And it's just a rule set. A better comparison would be to...
Let me interrupt you. One version of Ars Magica that people play is a sandbox. One version of Ars Magica that people play. I'm going to say a game is poorly designed. I'm not going to be like, Ars Magica is poorly designed. And like, I had so much fun playing Ars Magica. You had so much fun playing Ars Magica. And I'm talking about like a different thing.
What I was actually going to say there was, it would be better to get to a particular Ars Magica scenario which do have clearly defined goals. The Ghoul of Saint Lazare scenario is quite clearly involves dealing with the Ghoul of Saint Lazare. The scenarios would be a better comparison to the indie small games.
Oh. We should talk about this later in the parking lot. No. He's right. There's an expectation in conventional games like Ars Magica that the players are going to figure it out. They're going to decide what to do with it. And that's fine. Like, design that game if you want to design that game. I've seen enough of that game, but you guys, like, fundamentally, as a designer, there is a thing that you are trying to express, and do not let me get in between you and it, because that'll, like, I can't survive that. Stand between you and your guts. Like, I can't do that. Pass the cube down, and I'll take this question. Oh, more questions, for goodness sake. Okay, ask, and then I'll come to you, and then let me.
Do you think it's more difficult for the designer to make clear goals as the system is more and more generic, as it allows more and more different kinds of scenarios to be played?
I do not. I absolutely do not. I think that the relationship between your character's goal and your goal as a player accommodates. Like in Dungeons and Dragons, my goal as a player is to see my character prosper. And any scenario in which my character may or may not prosper, that allows me to pursue that goal. And so on. Please.
So would it be fair to say that, I hate to bring Ars Magica into this anymore, but anyway, that if you have that kind of game and a more focused game where the goal is more articulated, let's say, so that your point is that with a more articulated goal, it's more likely that people find out those functional ways of playing. And if the goal isn't articulated or isn't communicated to the players, well, they can still get good gaming out of it, but that doesn't mean that the game design is good. So fewer people perhaps get the awesomeness out of it.
This is a very interesting question, and this I'm going to say the Forge. This was a question that sort of constipated the Forge. The Forge was fixated on this question. And I disagree with the Forge. The Forge's line is that a more focused game means that more people will enjoy it. I think that role players are very good at their art. I think that the players are very good at enjoying a role-playing game, and that the art of the designer does not necessarily limit the skill of the designer does not necessarily limit the skill of the players, and that we love to play and we love to tell stories and make stories. What the designer's skill does is it allows me as the designer to more thoroughly supplant your natural best interests, which is to have fun and to maybe tell a story, with what I think your interest should be for the purpose of the game, and to more thoroughly supplant your natural interactions with the interactions I've constructed for the game. Does that answer your question? Because game designers are awful human beings. All I want in the world is to reach into your house and make you do something that you wouldn't naturally do. That's what I do. And not all we do. Well, anyway, let me set goals aside for now and talk about rules. And I'm going to say that the purpose of a role-playing game's rules, any given rule, any individual rule in a role-playing game, the purpose of that rule is to get the players to say or do something interesting. Now, interesting, now we're talking about goals, but we're going to set that aside. And we're going to talk about rules get you to say something interesting, and you judge whether it's interesting as a designer based on your goals. But there are time frames over which the rules work. Let me think of an example. So if I say my character walks over to the fridge and opens the fridge, that is not by itself an interesting thing to say. But let me say time frames. So is it interesting right now? Is it interesting tonight? And is it interesting for the game, right? And so if I say my character walks over and opens the fridge, that's not necessarily interesting. But it might be interesting if around that, on the tonight time frame, there's a severed head in the fridge, for instance, and we've established that earlier. Now my character going over to the fridge and opening it is interesting. There are a million things that role-playing game rules do that are not to get the players to say something interesting, and those are bad rules. You can tell if if a rule, as you're designing a game, you can tell if a rule is good, because if it's good, it gets people to say interesting things, or it makes what they say interesting. I go over and open the fridge. That's interesting if there's a rule that has put a severed head in the fridge beforehand. But if I am able to say, I go over to the fridge and open the fridge, and it's not interesting, that's a breakdown in the game design. Well, okay, that's a little grand. If I'm able to say it too much, like we're designing bell curves here, like I can say that, and it's not interesting. But in Murderous Ghosts, which is a tightly little game without much, you play it in half an hour, 45 minutes. There's not room for me to say uninteresting things. There's not room for me to gradually build to the point. So as a designer, one of the things you do is you know what's interesting. You decide what's interesting. Your gut tells you what's interesting. And then you judge the rules you're creating by whether they are leading people to say interesting things or leading people to say uninteresting things. Who's with me on that? Do we have questions? That's good. Okay. Here. Oh, a question. Okay, I will answer a question now. I would like to take a break and answer questions for a second.
Right, so I have a bit of a disagreement. That's the only thing. One of the other thing is a constraint, acting as a sort of.
Well, is it an interesting constraint or an uninteresting constraint?
Mostly, basically, sometimes it's just a necessary constraint. I mean, let's say in your game about the ghosts and in the basement.
Oh, is it an uninteresting necessary constraint?
Well, the constraints, for example, walls, they have to be there. Otherwise, it would be fairly uninteresting game. Don't you agree? The things.
Yeah.
So those constraints actually make it better to play the game because they don't allow you to do things.
Yes. In very many role-playing games, an important part of the goal is to occupy the space of your character for your character. And this is true of movies. In a movie, you'll watch somebody open the fridge. And it's interesting because it is a way that person, that fictional person, is occupying the space that they inhabit. And that's totally within the bounds of what I'm saying. You need to establish an environment. You need to establish a scene if the purpose of your role-playing game is to create fiction rather than to win. Establishing a scene, no, I take it back. No matter what. Like this is the stuff of role-playing. This is what separates role-playing games from video games and role-playing games from card games, is establishing a scene and creating a fictional environment and having a conversation about people who are not real, about things that are not real, and how they interact and how they come into contact with one another. So I don't think you're disagreeing with me. I think that I should expand what I'm saying to include that. Yes, please.
Hi. I'd like to ask still a clarification on the previous thing having to do with goals, I guess, but also it relates to this. Do I hear you correctly if I say that for you, the world, the fictional world of the role-playing game always has to be a product of the purpose of the game? Because in Ars Magica and World of Darkness and a million LARPs I've played and all kinds of, like in our tradition, there are a lot of games where you design a world first. And we all know this is because of the tradition of fantasy. First you design a world and then game design follows. So would you, in the context of that world, would you say that all of those games that are world-based in some way are by your definition, poorly designed? Oh, no. I'm okay with that, but is that what you're saying?
No, of course not. No, I shouldn't say of course not, because that's a legitimate clarification, but my answer is no. It all depends on how the game handles that world. I'm trying to think of an example. If like it's any canon, Middle Earth, for instance, even if it wasn't designed for a game, it's possible for a game to say, okay, we're in Middle Earth, we all know what Middle Earth is, and then for it to be well designed as a game we play in Middle Earth, or in a game we play in Ars Magica world, or whatever. So no, I wouldn't say that.
But then you'd have to like deduce the logic of the world and expand build the game, slot the game into that.
Well, the logic of the world becomes part of the game design. Yeah. And so if the logic of the world is leading you to say interesting things, then it's contributing to your design. Then it's a good part of your design. It's not a poor part of your design. Down here.
This seems to be threatening to move into the direction of some of the discussions many of us had with many of you at the Forge.
Yeah.
But let's go with it.
Well.
Sorry.
All right. Don't ask me to defend what we said on the Forge. I won't.
Nor I. I'm just wondering if how the tradition of the player goal being to sort of immerse yourself into the character and experience the fantasy world or whatever that you're in, and the difference of that with the character goal, whatever it is, I don't know, find the treasure, how that contrast works with your RPG's near goal theory. For example, my goal as a player could be just to play my character as true to the character as I can. And I could hope maybe that the character overcomes her alcoholism, and the character's goal could be getting really drunk all the time, for example.
You said two goals there.
Yes.
I'm
a complex person.
No, legitimately. I'm not contradicting you, but my proposal is that the reason you didn't stop at my goal is to inhabit my character and to experience what she experiences, and her goal is to get drunk, it's because that's not that interesting. And that's what's interesting there is this tension that you've introduced, which is that your goal is to see her, even to ask, does she overcome her alcoholism? That tension between your goal and her goal, which tension does not exist if your goal is to experience what she experiences and her goal is to get drunk. Does that answer? Let me talk a little bit about goals and tools. So in chess, my goal is to checkmate your king. In chess, my tools as a player are to move on the diagonal, move on the square, make the knights move, capture your pieces, castle sometimes, whatever that means. Sometimes my dudes move forward one at a time and sometimes two at a time. Like, these are the tools of chess. On my turn, turn taking is a tool. On my turn, I move one of my pieces. There is no tool in chess that allows me to straightforwardly checkmate your king. For instance, my queen, the rule of my queen is not my queen checkmates your king, for instance. So I propose that in a well-designed game, the tools you have at your disposal as a player make it possible, but not given, that you can achieve your goal. The tools that you have when you're playing this alcoholic woman are portraying her, taking actions that are within the scope of her reach, understanding her, and acting from a position of identification with her, a position of immersion with her, from her into her. Do you immerse in a character? Is that the usage. So making decisions from within a position of immersion. And that those tools do not make it given, but do make it possible for you to achieve your goal, which is to find out whether she overcomes her alcoholism or not. Right? Does that make sense? So when you're designing a role-playing game, thinking about what tools you give the players versus their goals, you create a tension between what the player can do now and what the player hopes and intends and strives to do. And that tension is common. You know, when I say role-playing game design is game design, that is the same tension in Shock, where my goal is to find out whether my character becomes a supporter of clone rights, which is not winning or losing, but is the same tension as drives any good game. Even, do I get my friends poker or money when we're playing poker, or do I win the most points when we're playing Go or whatever? Who's with me on that? Tools and goals and the tension between them. So does anybody want to, yes, please.
On the Murderous Ghost example, without playing it, so the goal in that one is for the spelunker to escape the cellar?
Yes.
Or
yes.
For the player to find out?
Oh no, my goal is to escape. If
when I'm playing that game, my goal as a player is not to have fun with this horror story and finding out whether funnily gruesome stuff happens, but just to escape.
Yeah, like it will usually be fun.
Yeah.
Fun emerges from watching a movie or playing a game, or most of the time, like if you like it. But you can play Murderous Ghosts and it's not fun. You can play correctly, you can play successfully, and it's not fun. You can win and it's not fun. For instance, what if you're scared? Like, what if you don't enjoy that? What if you get the wig?
Yeah.
Like, that's fun. Like, I have fun eating a meal. I don't.
Fun as watching a horror movie, being scared.
Yeah. Like
enjoying myself.
Like, I hope you have fun, but your goal is to escape.
Okay. So you just lost me there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, on the goal example.
So have you ever played a game that you won that wasn't fun?
No, that's a role-playing game we're talking about.
No, all games.
No, but I play a lot of games. I lose, and that's even like poker can be fun, even when you lose, or chess or whatever.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, have you ever played a game that wasn't fun when you played? Like, win or lose is a little harder. I'll come to you in a second. Win or lose is a little harder, but where you played correctly, where you played by the rules, you played as well as you could, and it wasn't fun. Like my example of Go.
Of course. I tried Ars Magica.
No, you can't play Ars Magica by the rules.
And
that's what we're fighting about over here.
I didn't like.
Yeah. So, or a video game that wasn't fun, where you're like, I beat the level, but I'm not playing that game again. Yeah. My proposal is that role-playing games are the same way, that you can play a role-playing game successfully and it's not fun. You can play it, and that chasing fun as a designer, like, I don't know what you like. How am I supposed to design a game that you find fun?
Yeah, just on the, like, answering questions, building tensions on whether I will escape and whether you will find out if your character acknowledges mutant or clone rights, or whether Mika's alcoholic character overcomes alcoholism, and wouldn't that be like the same tension whether I will escape the cellar? And that's the point where I'm lost. But
it's hard. Role-playing games that you can lose, like that's hard. I think that's not something.
Not lost as in losing, but just lost and as in don't understand your point in that.
So very often.
Not lost as in I just lost the game.
Maybe this will answer. Very often when I play Murderous Ghosts, I lose. The game is biased against the explorer. You can win if you know both books very well, and you can read the ghost player's body language and intentions. Then you can win better than half the time, but just better than half the time. And if you don't know both books very well, or if you're playing with someone you don't know very well, you lose most of the time. And it's wicked fun. Like, I love getting murdered by ghosts because it's scary, it's a rush. You don't have to win a game for it to be fun. Losing a game doesn't mean it's not fun. But nevertheless, when you murder me, I'm going, that was fucking scary, and you totally murdered my ass. Like, you win that game. Is that a serious, like, that's not a problem in other games. Like, you can lose at poker and enjoy it. Poker is hard because that's a lot of money, or a small amount of money, or whatever. You get emotions involved. You can lose at Magic the Gathering and super enjoy it. You can lose at. Am I wrong? Am I wrong?
Hard to say.
Yeah, hard to say.
But
my question was more. It was about like formulating the goals, but yeah. I agree. Let's just move on.
Thank you. You're very patient. I'm sorry for the people who are leaving. Where was I? Oh yes, about the tension between your tools and your goals. Nathan.
You said that the winning has to be possible. Just want to clarify on that. So, if there was a game design where winning was impossible, like the Kobayashi Maru from Star Trek, would you think that's bad game design?
No. I don't want to chase that too far. My point is more that we can and should talk about role-playing games in these terms. What I'm really saying is that that's a design challenge. If you can design a game where winning is impossible and it's fun, you should, if you want to. Like, that's a challenge on you as a designer. I may have done that. It's hard to tell. My game, The Doomed Pilgrim, which you play online, it may be impossible to win if your opponent is playing well, and it may still be fun to play. I don't know. It hasn't.
You could argue Pendragon is that all characters die from old age.
Oh, it depends on the goal. Does that mean losing? I don't think so. But in the Doomed Pilgrim, that means losing. But I don't want to chase that. That's a design challenge.
Okay. Small clarification then. Is the important thing that winning is possible, or the player thinks it's possible?
That's a good question. Yes, please.
Just a little thought about the goal of winning with the Murderous Ghosts, for example. Might it be useful to make a slight difference between the character's goal, which is obviously not dying and getting away, and the player's goal of enjoying a good trip? Basically, I mean, many of us gamers just love to watch the characters dig their own graves.
Yes, no, of course. But I'm not talking about the goal of the player's art. I'm talking about the design goal. I'm talking about me telling you that if your character escapes, you win, and if your character doesn't, you lose. And what that allows you to do is play with clarity. That allows you to set aside all of the competing interests that interfere with your decision making, and to say, this is the decision I make because this is the decision that takes me toward winning. And that my position is, my contention is that is a grace that I give the player that allows the player clarity of experience that is valuable, that is fun, that is less, like we've all had games, we've all played games where I'm not sure what my character should do, right? Where like, I know that this person wants my character to do this thing, but I think that might not be true to what I think of my character. Which of those things do I do? I know that the author of the scenario thinks this about my character, but I think this about my character, and that creates this anxiety in my play that something like your goal is to escape, or your goal is to come to the answer of this question, whether it's good or bad, whether it's whatever the answer is, that gives me a basis by which to judge my own play, by which to play with confidence, and with boldness, with self-assurance, even with imagination. I have a lot of questions. Did I say something controversial?
Well, I think you made it up, summed up the last half an hour.
Okay.
Now I understand what you mean.
Okay, that's great. For the sake of the mic, he says that now he understands what I mean. Please, yes.
Am I understanding you correctly? I get the feeling that when you are sort of not enthusiastic about goals like having fun or having a good trip, is that if we are talking about game design, then a goal like having fun is way too general and you can't really do anything with it because there are really lots of ways of having fun.
How do you know if the rule you've just created leads people toward that goal or away from it? How do you judge your competence? How do you judge your skill as a designer, your accomplishment, the accomplishment of your design? If your goal is to say to the player, look, a thing, right?
Yeah. So you're saying that instead you just set up some goal which you sort of intuitively think that people would probably enjoy, and then focus on making that more concrete goal a sort of coherent and functional one, and then you don't need to explicitly worry about having fun as a separate goal, because the people who enjoy that sort of thing will just find your game, and the people who don't enjoy that will play something else.
Yes, like very much so. Like if you don't enjoy
being killed by ghosts.
Exactly, being murdered by ghosts, you should not play this game. Like, we all know that. And it doesn't do me any favors or you any favors if I try to create a game about being murdered by ghosts that somebody who doesn't enjoy it. Anyway, so yes, I think so. Did you have a question? Pass the block forward.
I think I forgot it halfway through that question, but personally I think maybe the thing that another person has a different idea how your character acts and how you think he or she should act is basically pretty normal in real life as well. Other people expect you to act in certain ways. So I think it's sort of important function in role-playing.
It depends on the goal of the game. I am certainly willing to accept that there are games whose goals, for the goals of the game, that is a valuable tool and an effective tool that leads people to saying interesting things, that creates interesting and useful tension between that tool and the goal of the game. Yeah, absolutely. That's something you can use as a designer if it suits the design of your game. Let me, instead of taking more questions, let me read this, and I'm sorry to read this just out. I did not get it together to project this. Okay, so this is my newest game. It's called The Sundered Land, and it is 5 short games. Each of the 5 games is this long. You play it, each game takes half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour to play. So if you have 4 hours to play, you play 5 or 6 of the games in order, in whatever order you choose. You bring characters in and toss characters out and so on. But this text is about what I included in each of these 5 games. Each of these 5 games. So each of these games includes who are the characters, what are they doing, what's set against them. They include what are the players' jobs. In the case of most of these games, the player's job is to answer questions about their character. What does your character do? What does your character look like? What does your character think? What are the character's goals? For instance, in this game, which is called Caravan Guards in the Ruins of the Future, your goal, your character's goal, is to see this caravan to safety along the road. And who's the GM? These games are GM'd. Not all games are. Not all role-playing games are. I'm the GM. The GM's job is to create something that will attack the caravan and try to destroy it. So who are the characters? What are they doing? And what's set against them? The characters are caravan guards. Oh my God. The characters are caravan guards. What's set against them is the hazard that I create that's trying to destroy their caravan. And their goal is to see the caravan through. But here's where it gets interesting. What are we playing to find out? We're playing to find out whether the caravan is destroyed or sees its way through to safety. We're playing to find out whether I escape from the ghosts or whether the ghosts murder me. What circumstances call for a die roll? These games use dice. Many games don't, but these games happen to. For each of the rolls, why am I reading this? For each of the rolls, possible results from what might happen. We all know this. When something, and then it gets into the next good stuff, which is when something might happen, what's the conversation we should have about it? So I want to talk about the conversations we should have about this. I'm working on a game right now about space marines who are on an alien planet who are being infected with it's like aliens, right? We're being infected with some alien parasite. In that game, when you come under stress, you roll dice. Most the grand unified mechanic, like the thing where you always roll percentile dice under the skill, right? That's a bad idea, turns out. That's one conversation we can have, right? The conversation where I say, do you succeed at driving the car? And you roll the dice and you say, yes. That's a conversation we can have, but that isn't a very interesting conversation. That isn't a conversation that is always interesting for every circumstance. Do you hit him with your gun? Yes. Like, the conversations that we can have when we're playing a game are much more various than this single die roll. For instance, you can say to me, what do you hope the ghost doesn't do? And that's a very different conversation than, do you successfully drive the car? we can say in the Sundered Land, you're fighting these bandits. We roll the dice. The dice tell us that it might go terribly wrong. Might go terribly wrong. So what the rules say is you have one chance to say what you do to get help or to pull it out of the fire so that it doesn't go terribly wrong. And so you say, I stab the bandits. I hack them with my axe. And then we all vote, thumbs up, thumbs down, right? That is a different interaction that we have just had than do you successfully hit the bandit with your axe, right? So what I'm trying to get at here is that the conversations we can have, we should, as designers now, the conversations we have as players, as designers, we should think about the conversations we want our players to have and how those conversations are ordered, structured differently, depending on the topic of the conversation. There's this great example. Again, my friend Joshua was designing a game and he wanted a unified mechanic. So he came up with this great mechanic for physical conflicts. Like you and I are having, our characters are having a fight. And we roll dice to find out how difficult it is for my character to physically dominate yours. How far do I have to go in order to physically dominate your character, right? Do I have to surprise you? Do I have to wound you, or can I just hold you down? And we find out that. And he said, okay, great. That works great. That's fun. That's challenging. It's enjoyable. That's a conversation that's fun to have. Now, your character is researching, like has an object, an unfamiliar object, and is trying to understand it. So how far do you have to go in order to understand it? Do you have to surprise it? Do you have to damn it? This is a different conversation, right? And the conversation he was trying to impose, the player's conversation that he was trying to impose on this entirely different subject matter was not suitable to it. Who is with me here? Beautiful, beautiful. If you take away one thing from all of this nonsense that I've been saying, all this egregious nonsense that I've been saying, it's that as a designer, what you should be thinking about is, does the conversation the players are having suit the subject matter that they're talking about? Let me give you an example from my game Apocalypse World, which I think I have here. And I love this example. This is one of the best things I've designed in the past 5 years or something. When your character and my character are interacting, our characters can see each other's body language. Your character would be able to read my character's tone of voice and my character's eye movements, where my character hesitates and where my character touches her face. Like these are all body language, cue reading things that our characters would be able to do that we can't because we're up here, we're just talking about them, right? And so I wrote these rules to model those skills that our characters have that we don't have access to from our position up here. And they are, when you're interacting with someone, at the beginning of your conversation, you roll some dice, and the result of the dice tell you that over the course of the conversation, you as a player can ask me as a player questions about what my character is thinking, is feeling. And these are things that your character has guessed by watching my character's body language. This is knowledge that your character has access to. And the way your character gets that knowledge is by you as a player asking me as a player about my character. So the questions are things like, is your character telling the truth? What's your character really feeling? What does your character intend to do? How could I get your character to do X? So this is an entirely different conversation. How could I get your character to do X, right? So you're playing your alcoholic character, right? And I'm playing your alcoholic character's brother, and I'm worried about you, right? In Ars Magica, I make a persuasion roll, and I say, you have to stop drinking. And we look at that and we say, you succeed, I succeed, right? Like that's a terrible, terrible conversation for us to have where your character's brother is asking your character to stop drinking. In Apocalypse World, in those rules, I would roll these dice and we would have this conversation and I would say, don't you think you're drinking an awful lot? And you would say, no, it's fine. You know, everybody drinks. And I would hold my character, pause my character for just a second, and I would say, what could I do to get your character to drink less? And you would say, that's a really great question. And so we have this moment of honesty about our characters that then reflects the communication that they have as siblings. They know each other, they can read each other in a way that we can't. And that's a much better conversation. Like, that's not the perfect way to do everything, but that's a much better conversation about this interaction than, yes, I successfully persuade your character. So if you take one thing away, it's that the conversations we have are what role-playing is made of, and as designers, we should be matching those conversations so carefully to the subject matter, to our vision for how the game should go.
Continue with this a little bit. Like, okay, I said, okay, I have to resolve our issues with my mother. What then?
Oh, so that, I make the persuasion. So that means that I can say, okay, how am I going to do that, right? And so now, instead of my character, no, let me see if I can construct that a little better. So now I can make that naturalistic, right? Now I can have my character take action based on this insight that my character has had about your character, that you have given me as players. I can have my character do naturalistic things to create the possibility for that, to ask the question back to you in provocative ways, to explore that situation between your character and your character's mother. That's what next. The seduction role, right, is so much like that. That's a terrible role. That's like, I roll to seduce you. Like, that's awful, right? That's awful. But what could my character do to get your character to sleep with my character? Like, that's really interesting. You can say, well, you could bring me the head of my enemy. And I say, oh, really? I could. That's really great. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, even though you're my brother.
Have you been watching Game of Thrones? Yeah. Nathan again.
Thank you.
I think I would devil's advocate slightly. Defensive rolling for social interactions. Part of the purpose of that is to fast track past unimportant ones. So you don't want to see his papers roll. What you don't do is go up to the Emperor and say, you don't want to take over the galaxy, roll. The dice are there to skip past the boring, unimportant bits, and then you roll play out the important, interesting bits.
Well, that depends on your goals as a designer. Like, that's extremely legitimate. What you just said is an extremely legitimate articulation of your goal as a designer for a game. You can and should and are able to design that game.
I think it's been done.
I approve of that as a goal of a game.
But that's why D&D and Ars Magica and other games have social stats and social roles to fast track the boring bits.
Oh, maybe. Or maybe the designer was pursuing it. Stop talking to me. I'm kidding. More questions?
Thanks. I want to go a little bit about mechanics of some games. I have trying for many months, about half a year or more, create an RPG game. Not too powerful magical system, but still that it have some power in it. It has that kick of the magic.
Sure.
But not like that, well, there comes the army of orcs. One gablam!
Yeah. No, I know that exact impulse. Let me give you some very concrete advice. Very concrete advice. It is to put a human being, a person at the table, put a human being between your character's action and the consequences of your character's action. For instance, to have a human being at the table make decisions that are outside of your character's control about how that happens. And like, GMs are fine, right? Like, whatever. But someone whose job it is to make that decision interesting. For instance, imagine the three of us, I'm going to use you because you're sitting right there. The three of us are playing this game. And I cast my giant spell at the orcs, and I roll the dice. And the dice say I get to spend points to decide how many orcs are killed and how dead they're killed and how long they're killed for. Right, you see what I mean? I have a range and I have a duration and I have an extent of the effect. And so I have to turn to you and say, would you please make those decisions for me? And then you tell him what happens with my spell. Like, putting that human being making decisions in between my character's action and the effect of my character's action brings the whole thing to life. Like, that's super exciting as a very concrete suggestion for how I would approach that problem. Now, I'm gonna write on the board. Oh, I should write in blue this time. What if yourself out of conventionality? When you cast a spell, what if the player to your left decides what happens? When you have a combat, what if you roll all the dice up front instead of rolling them one by one over the course of combat? When we all have this body of role-playing game mechanics in our heads, in our experiences that we're building from. What if you did them just a little bit differently? What if you combined these two? What if you broke this one apart? What if you just made these little changes, right? What if? And when I'm designing in my game design process, this is a very, very important part of my game design process. What if we each had a book that we looked at? Like what if it was a choose your own adventure, right? And I don't know how to say. I was at PAX Dev a couple of years ago, which is a game designer, not for tabletop role-playing games, but just for game designers. It's a conference in front of the Penny Arcade Expo in Seattle a couple of years ago, and Richard Garfield stood up, and his presentation to a bigger audience than this, much bigger audience than this, was you should play lots of games. You should play games you like. You should play games you hate. You should play role-playing games, board games, video games, solitaire games. You should play sports. You should gamble, like play gambling games. That all games are game design, and that you learn. And he spent an hour, 20 minutes telling game designers that they should play games. And he got some pushback, and that's so strange to me. Like, why couldn't his first slide have been, "Hey, fellow game designers, you know how we all play all the games all the time? Here is what we can learn from that." But so I don't know how to say, like, what if yourself out of conventionality? Like, obviously, right? That's what everybody does in every field when they're trying to solve a problem in their field, in their design field. They think laterally and they draw in information from other fields, related fields or unrelated fields. And you just, like, I don't know what to say about that other than, like, you know how as a game designer you're always thinking about game design? You're always trying on different things and trying to find your way through problems in different ways. And if you're not, you should be. That's what I should say about that. If you're not, you should be. If you're not, you should go to a museum. You should look at things. You should look at the tools that people have designed. You should go to a museum. You should look at the tools people have designed. You should play other games. You should play all the games. You should look at how. So I said earlier, you never play a game for fun. You never get to do anything for fun if you're a designer. You never do. Everything you do is practice and is study and is research. And like, I'm just some guy. I'm not. But game design is awesome. And that's all I have to say about that. No, you're too kind. Stop. There was one other thing I wanted to talk a little bit about, and then I'll take some more questions. But let me talk about this. One of the things I say to everybody is that a role-playing game in particular, as a designer, you have insights into role-playing as a practice, right? These are things like, we could have a different conversation about this. Somebody else could interfere in this conversation we're having. There could be a GM, there could not be a GM. This could be the GM's job, right? These are insights that we have into role-playing as a practice. And so when you design a game, it is necessarily an expression of those insights that you've had, and we all have them. You have insights into your subject matter. So for instance, I say in this book, I say that a ghost is a creature of sorrow, and a murderous ghost is a creature of sorrow turned to violence. So think of something sad and turn it violent. And that's an insight, like whatever value it has. That's something I think about ghost stories, right? Especially murderous ghost stories. So that's an insight I have into my subject matter. My game Dogs in the Vineyard, I said, and this is not original to me, I said, Elmore Leonard, who's a great crime novelist, right? He wrote a bunch of Westerns. So I'll bet you could build a great Western on sort of the underpinnings of a crime story. Not a mystery story necessarily, but the investigators come upon the scene of the crime and they have to decide what to do. So that's an insight into Westerns that I expressed. So you have an insight into role-playing as a practice. You have, or many insights into role-playing as a practice. You have insights into your subject matter. And you have insights into real live human beings in the world. You have insights into a human experience, right? And I went to school, one of the times I went to school, one of the times I dropped out of school, I was studying fiction. And I think of this as I still write stories once in a while. I think of this as the fiction writer's insight, right? If I were a novelist, and let me talk about Dogs in the Vineyard. In Dogs in the Vineyard, the way the mechanics work, if you're losing an argument, that's when you're motivated to throw a punch. If you're winning an argument, you're not motivated to throw the punch. If you're losing a fist fight, that's when you're motivated to pull a knife or a gun. And if you're winning the fist fight, you're not motivated to pull a knife or a gun, you're winning. So this is something I actually kind of think about real life violence, right? This is something I think about how an argument turns violent. Whether it's true or not, I don't know, but it's something I kind of think. If I were a novelist, I would explore that insight in my novel. Since I'm a game designer, I create a system that allows the players to explore that insight, right? An insight into role-playing as a practice, an insight into your subject matter, and an insight into how people really experience the world. And I think that I say an insight, a body of insights, a body of insights, a body of insights. And a complete game, a finished game, if you want to design a game to completion, it will necessarily express those three things. And I have people come up to me all the time, my friends, my fellow designers come up to me all the time and say, Vincent, I have a great idea for a game. Check this out. You move the dice like this, and there is a GM, and the GM's job is to do this. And I say, that's awesome. That's great. Once you attach that to some subject matter and some real life experiences, then you'll have a game, right? That is the last point I wanted to touch on, I think. And we have 10 minutes left for questions. Yes, where's the cube? Oh.
Who wants? Okay, not all of your games are very clearly written.
Yes,
Ice
that's true.
Poisoned, for example, which I love.
Well,
yeah.
We'll take that as given for the sake of your question, even though it's not true.
It has raised a lot of questions on the internet.
It surely has.
Yeah. And you said it yesterday in your lecture. What a feature.
my Q&A yesterday.
That you wrote Apocalypse World so that about 30% of the audience would understand it perfectly.
Oh my God. Okay,
and
yes.
so on, so on. And do you feel that's sort of intentional clarity gives something to the design and enhances play experience?
I don't know. That's an excellent question. That's something for you as a designer to play with. It's something for me as a designer to play with. Is like there is research that suggests that text written in an inconvenient font, an inconvenient face, that working your way through an inconvenient text aids retention. Is that true of role-playing games? Like, does that change the way you play a game if you've had to struggle with the text to understand it? I don't know. I can't conduct research. I just publish games. But so that's something that is interesting to like, I don't know, how would you test that? We could find out. We could try to find out. But it's definitely a variable that's in there that we can play with as designers. Does that answer close enough? Okay. Yes?
Another way of putting a human in the magic system before, that mentioned before, would be to make the cost of the magic paid by the other characters somehow.
Oh, yes.
Somebody's firstborn dies every time, or like they take wounds in the group or something like that.
That would be like, check this out. This would be a fantastic magic system. If like I look at it and I say, well, that means that 10 children have to die. Well, who has children?
Yeah. So my question is like that appeals to me more, but I notice your bias seems to be to make the cool conversation between players, and I wonder, could you talk about the relative merits of making the interesting conversation in character versus between the players?
That's a great question. I don't know the relative merits. I know which way I've decided that case by case for my own games, depending on what that particular subsystem, right, what that particular interaction has to accomplish in order to make the game complete. And I don't know how else you would judge that. But it's certainly possible as a designer to say, okay, everything we do is going to be in character. and to see if you can, to see how far you can take that, to see how awesome that is, or where that introduces struggles that breaking character would not introduce, and how you make those trade-off, make those decisions. Like, it's very important to me in the reading a person rules that these are things that my character is reading from your character's body language and posture and eye movements and tone of voice and so on. And why is that so important to me when it could just be an interaction between the players? But it is important to me, and it's a piece of that game design that it is. And would it be better for those interactions to be in character somehow? I don't know. In the case of those, that was what I landed on. But those are all decisions that we get to make. One of the things I like to say, is that, you know, when you have these three insights, they come together in this moment of brilliant clarity, right? Where I say, oh, I was driving home from work and it's Dogs in the Vineyard. Who knows my game, Dogs in the Vineyard? A few of you probably. Yeah. And I had this beautiful insight where it all came together, and it was that you put the dice forward 2 at a time instead of 1 at a time. So, you know, this very concrete action that made everything else fit into place in this moment of clarity. But then the entire rest of the game is compromises with reality, right? To the point where I said this. Somebody asked me which game I was most proud of. It was you. Asked me which game I was most proud of, and I said, well, I'm proud of the perfect piece in every single one of my games, but the rest of the game is a compromise. And I think that's so. I think it's hard to say, you know, in this game, all of the interactions will be in character, and then at some point you compromise with your vision to create something real instead of something imaginary. But I think that those visions are important to the design process, and I think that they challenge and inspire us as designers. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope you're okay. I have a question, or maybe an insight related to your whole speech there. I've noticed in your designs, especially in Dogs in the Vineyard, which I quite enjoyed, but a lot of the mechanics are like, there's the story, there's my character, there are the interactions between the characters, and then the mechanics are like this separate gamey bit, where I have to sort of think forward, okay, I have these and these and these dice on the table, I don't really want to use this yet, or rather,
sure.
Okay, now I'm making a big play with my pistol or something like that. Yeah. And it would be, if I were to pick the dice that would most reflect okay, I'm really going all out and threatening this guy with my pistol. But if I play my best dice now, I can see that I'm going to lose.
Yeah.
So I'm having to play this entirely separate metagame while trying to be in character. And I found that like the weakest link, I'm sorry to say, in that design.
No, please.
Whereas in... you also brought up Apocalypse World. And in Apocalypse World, there's which you brilliantly modeled with Mika there, with the brother trying to seduce his sister.
Yeah.
The mechanics for reading, asking the questions. Okay, so what are you really thinking? What's the actual emotional tone of your character at this moment? And I think that's really the key bit for me in game design. The choices that I, as a player, make should reflect the choices that my character in the situation is doing. When I'm designing something, I try to like merge these as close as possible.
Sure. That's a perfectly legitimate way to design. I wholeheartedly endorse and approve you designing that way. And you know, I will say that when I designed Dogs in the Vineyard, I was a child, and when I designed Apocalypse World, in a lot of ways, Apocalypse World is my first design as an adult in my craft, right? Apocalypse World is my my university work, right? It's my masterpiece in the old sense. You know, it shows that I can design a game, but it's not me as a designer. Last time I tried to play Dogs in the Vineyard, I was like, oh my God, do we have to get all these dice out? This is ridiculous. But at the same time, like that's a variable that I am very willing as a designer to play with. You know, this structures our interactions incredibly tightly, and not to my character's experience necessarily. You know, I suddenly have to choose. My hands won't stop shaking. I cover my face. I'm whimpering. You know, there's this whole structure to the interaction, and that's like I said, that's a variable I'm very willing to play with as a designer, and that doesn't mean that every designer should be willing to, like, stake your ground, make your claim, express your insights, express your vision. Hooray! More questions?
Thank you.
More questions? Yes, over here.
That was close. A lot of your systems seem to be GM-less. GM-less, no GM, or
You're thinking of somebody else.
Very little GM.
No.
For example, the Ghost system. No GM, as far as I know. It's the Ghost and the player character. Not really.
Wait, are you saying my games do have GMs or don't have GMs?
Don't. Or at least GM's role is like small compared to, I don't know, Pathfinder. Okay? This is the impression I got from this whole thing.
No, in all of the games I have opinions about what GMs should do, and they're different opinions from game to game. But in all, I have not designed a GM-less game. I don't consider myself competent to design a GM-less game. I've never figured out how to make that work as a designer.
That was my point. One of the most important things, in my opinion, what GM does is manages expectations. And you've managed somehow to transfer some of that burden to the system in some cases. The checklist in one of your mini games was like an excellent idea. It sort of sets the expectation of what is going to happen.
Yeah.
And this is, in my opinion, also important in goals.
Murderous Ghosts, you called out Murderous Ghosts over here. Murderous Ghosts is a very interesting case. And to decide whether Murderous Ghosts has a GM or doesn't, we would have to decide what a GM is, what a GM must do. You know, one of my friends put forward that Murderous Ghosts has a secret GM, which is me working through the books. And like I don't know that we can chase down what's a GM and what isn't. But I think that observation that in my games I lay out what's going to happen and what the GM's job in the game is going to be. Like maybe it's true that makes it less a GM than in Pathfinder, you said. I don't know. I think that observation is true, whether the conclusion that means I design GM-less games or not. That's one where we would just have to decide what a GM is in order to judge. Question. One last question. Oh, I have 0 minutes left. 0 minutes left. Look out. Throw. Yeah. I'm being totally unkind to the person who follows.
Where do you think is the value in making actual games? Because you said like each of your games has one really good mechanic. So why don't you just make a book with like 10 really good mechanics?
People ask me this. Why don't you write a book of GM advice? Like, I don't understand. I can't think of it that way. I don't know. Thanks. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your patience.
Ropecon.